Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. I'm going to give it a couple minutes so we can get everybody on. There we go. Hello. Oh, it's so great to see everybody. Okay, while we're waiting for everyone to get on, because the numbers are still climbing really quickly, so I want to give it a few minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really, really excited for this topic. I know this one is really important to a lot of people out there, so hopefully I can present some really interesting information and then also give us enough time to really do some in-depth Q&A. So that's my goal today. A couple things to note, and I will go into this again once we start the official presentation. One, I'm just going to put out a disclaimer. I don't know where everyone is at the moment, but I'm on Long Island and a thunderstorm just started. So I'm just going to warn anybody, if I suddenly go away or you hear weird noises in the background, it could be because it's decided to have a big storm right now. So that should be fun. Oh, thanks, Lindsay. I'm so excited. Hi, Raynal. Hi, Kara. Oh, it's so exciting to see everybody here. I am going to really encourage you to actually use the chat feature. It's why I really like this platform, is because it gives you an opportunity to not only interact with me, but also with everybody who's on the webinar with you. And so one thing I want to remind everyone is that this is being, oh, Luz, I hope it goes by quickly. Please tell me it was short. Luz is in New York City, so it's coming from New York City over to Long Island. So hopefully it will pass quickly, because I just heard this whole crack of thunder right before I hit record. A couple things to note before we get started. This is being recorded. As such, I just want you to be careful about when you're in the chat functionality. It's not the best idea to give out your personal phone number or email address if you want to network with other people that you're meeting. Instead, I would suggest giving your LinkedIn profile URL or your Twitter handle or something like that. 30 minutes. Okay, well, that's not bad. We got whole 90 here. A couple other things to note is that you will receive a copy of this. And so if for any reason you need to duck out at some point, don't worry, we will be sending you a copy of the full recording. Also, as you start networking with people, if you strike up a conversation with somebody who's in the chat, I highly recommend copying and pasting the information and putting it into a Word doc, a Google Doc, jotting it down, because when we have a lot of people going, by the end of the webinar, you will not be able to scroll all the way to the top. Unfortunately, it is one of the limitations of this program. Looks good. I'm just checking out the numbers. The numbers are still climbing in terms of participants fairly quickly. So I'm going to give it maybe 2 more minutes, and then I will start the presentation. So if anybody needs to run, oh my gosh, of course you can have a recording. Yes, Arnab, I'm so sorry it's so late where you are. Yes, 100%. Everybody who has registered for this event will receive a link that will provide the presentation at the end. So you will get a recording. Don't worry about that. Oh, Todd, I'm jealous of your beautiful weather. All right, I think we're about there. So why don't I pop in to the presentation? Bear with me for a moment. Dun, dun, dun. Here are my slides. Get ready. All right, so hopefully you can see. I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit. So hopefully everybody can see the presentation as well as me in a little corner somewhere. So thank you so much for joining me for this presentation today. As I mentioned before, I'm really excited about this one because I've had a lot of people, even just in my own personal life, come to me with this question recently. And so it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. This is my hello screen. If you've been to one of my webinars, you know I always have it. I just like it. I want to be friendly. So let's talk a little bit about who the heck am I and why am I qualified to be talking about this? My name is Amanda Augustine, and I am a certified professional career coach and resume writer. I'm also the resident career expert for Talent Inc.'s suite of brands. So that includes TopResume, which is our US-based one, Top CV, which is more international, and Top Interview, which covers the whole gamut. Couple things to note, you can hit up the advice on either of our websites for Top Resume or Top CV using the links below. And also, if you have not already requested a free resume or CV review, or you're interested in working one-on-one with a resume or CV writer, you can access some special rates through the links on this page as well. A little bit more about me. I have been in this industry for over 15 years now. I can't do the math off the top of my head, but it's been a while. My entire career, for the most part, has been in career services. And so I'm so excited to be able to have these opportunities to share this information with everyone. I'm sure if you haven't noticed already, I talk a little quickly. I'm from the Northeast US. It's kind of how I've always been. I've only had 1 cup of half-calf coffee. This is what you get. So again, please put in the chat if you need me to slow down, repeat something. If you have additional questions and you're concerned you won't remember it at the end of the presentation, feel free to put those questions in the chat box and put note the Q button, which means, hey, it's a Q&A. My amazing moderator and partner in crime, Jenna, who has been by my side for many, many years now and is just amazing. She will make sure we take all those questions and set them to the side so that I can answer them at the end. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, quick look. Just wanted to give you an overview. Again, we have more than one brand. I know a lot of people are viewing this also outside of the US. So here's a quick idea of, should you be looking at Top Resumes content or Top CVs? If you reside within the US, actually more importantly, if you are looking for a job in the United States or another country that requires a resume as the primary job application tool, then Top Resumes your site. If you are looking for a job in the UK or other countries where a CV is considered the appropriate application tool of choice, then Top CV is what you need. Jenna, hate to put you on the spot already, but if we could grab that article, probably the Top CV article makes the most sense, or maybe Top Resume and Top CV. I know we have articles on both that kind of explain when you should use a resume versus a CV, what countries and how resumes and CVs differ country to country. That might be a good tool to show everyone, because that will help explain kind of which site you should be looking at and where you should be seeking help as you begin your job search. And I always want to throw this out there. Of course, my face is in the way and I don't know if I can move it. Nope. My face is in the way, but I will try and pull this up for you really quickly. So watch me type like a maniac. Here we go. Our parent company, Talent Inc., is always hiring. We're hiring quite a number of positions at the moment. And so if any of these positions make sense for you, that you're interested in them, please, please, please feel free to check out these job listings and, sorry, let's try that again. Check out these job listings and apply if it makes sense for you. I just put it in the chat functionality in the chat section, so you should be able to access the link that my face seems to be covering up at the moment. Okay. A few housekeeping rules, things just to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, and we will continue to mention it, this webinar will be recorded and it will be emailed to everyone who registered for the event. So rest assured, if you are here, you will receive an email from my team. It typically goes out about 24 hours after the event, and it will provide a link that will give you access to the recording. So you will be able to see this. I really, really encourage this. We did this a lot in the last webinar because it was focused on networking, but I really was so excited by how much interaction was going on. So I want to make sure we're still leveraging it regardless of the topic. So if you haven't already, please get in that chat box and introduce yourself. Most importantly, not only just where are you from, but what have you been doing? And I think the most important, what kind of career change are you looking to make? And I think it's really important to talk about kind of what you've done before and what you're looking to do next, because you may be able to connect with somebody who either has a similar goal in mind, so you can partner up and join forces, share resources, help one another out. But you might also be able to find somebody who's perhaps trying to break into a role that you've already held, or an industry you've already been a part of. Or maybe you can find somebody who was previously or is currently working in a field that's very interesting to you, so that you can start creating those relationships and really share intel with one another. So please, if you haven't done it already and you haven't provided this level of detail, I highly recommend it. I'd also just caution you, please, to not necessarily put your email address or phone number out there just for security purposes. Instead, you can give the link to your LinkedIn profile, a Twitter handle, an Instagram handle, any way that they can get in contact with you that's not necessarily giving away some very personal contact information. I hope that makes sense to everyone. I mean, if you want to, it's your life. You do what you do, but that's just my little disclaimer. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but I want to say it again. There will be a Q&A portion. And if I run out of time for it, we will still stay on for a little bit and answer questions, but I'm really trying to keep it within the time frame we have allotted for this webinar. So please ask your questions, type them into the chat area, and then just check the box for Q. And that way it flags it for Jenna. Jenna will pull those questions and have them set aside so that I can then look at them and answer them as once we get to the Q&A area. And I'm just popping up just to see. Okay, and Jenna's there. She's good. Everything seems to be working. And last but certainly not least, please be kind and courteous. We're all here trying to give and receive support. So let's be nice to each other. There are no stupid questions. I'd rather you ask the question in a safe environment and get the answer you need than not know what you're doing with certain things about your career or your job search. So please, let's all try and keep it really positive. Now let's get into some real material, right? I want to start with a poll. And Jenna, are you able to run that for me? I think you are. Let me know if you need me to do it. I'm also open in Slack, so let me know if you need me to do that. But I'd like to ask a poll just to get a sense of what's everybody looking for. So do you want to change careers or industries, but you're not sure what you want to do? So you're coming to just going, I hate what I'm doing, but I don't know what I want to do next. What can I do? What makes sense, et cetera, and so forth. That would be the first option. You know what you want to do, but you're just not sure how to get there. I really like this type of field, but what do? I have no experience in that. Perhaps you're looking to turn a side business into a full-time career. I'm not necessarily tailoring this webinar for someone who wants to start their own business. I feel like that's really kind of a completely separate topic. But if you're trying to turn your side business into more of a corporate role, maybe you've been doing something for fun, but maybe you love writing and now you'd like to pursue a job that allows you to write for a living or something along those lines, this would be a good option for you. Did you recently graduate and you're looking to break into an industry or career for the first time that interests you? Maybe you don't have a lot of previous experience. That's the option. And then other. And I realized one thing I didn't really put on here, but perhaps you're retiring from a certain career. Maybe you were in the military and that's done, and now you're looking for the next chapter. You might be able to find something amongst these answers that makes sense, but let's get that poll kicked off. Let me see. It's looking great. Okay. So I am just looking to see, I think you can all see it as well. I just want to take a minute to see what we're doing and kind of where everybody's at. Okay. So yep, I'm going to give it one more minute. Get your answer in. If you can't see it, there is a poll section. Let us know what's your situation, because I've got a lot of slides, and if some of them are not relevant to anyone here, I will skip them. I want to make sure that whatever I'm providing is relevant to everyone. Rest assured, what I have planned is to talk about how you figure out what you want to do if you're not too sure about it, as well as, okay, well, I know, but now what do I do with that information? I plan to cover all of that. And I think that works really well, even if you're recently graduated. It's the same thing, figuring out what you want to do, or you have an idea, but you're not too sure what to get there. And the degree alone isn't doing it for you. All right, this is great. Last 10 seconds, get your poll in. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a good chunk, almost half of you aren't sure what you want to do next. And I think that's great, actually, because there's a lot of information, a lot of resources I'm going to provide to help you figure that out. And then there's another, almost the rest of you are like, all right, well, I know, but I want to figure out how to get there. So my goal is to make sure we cover all of that. So thank you so much for providing that information. Okay, this is what I promised to deliver in this webinar, and that is what I will do. Talking about determining your new goals and priorities, identifying and articulating your transferable skills, rebranding those application materials for your transition, and then we're going to have live Q&A. I have to be honest, when I was creating this, it took me forever because I kept flip-flopping the first 2 bullets here. And I was trying to figure out, well, where do I want to go first? Because it is kind of a chicken and an egg thing. If you've had a career, if you've been in the workforce, even if it's been a few years, there are skills there. And oftentimes it's easier to identify what am I great at and then explore where that applies to different roles if you're not too sure of your career goals. Other times, maybe it is clarifying those career goals, and now you got to figure out, well, what skills do I need and what do I already have and how do I emphasize those and how do I fill in the gaps. It's really a chicken and an egg. They go hand in hand. And so, I just want to put that out there before I start the slides to give you an idea that we could flip-flop back and forth between a lot of them because truly they're both going to help you. I also switched my slides around multiple times, so let's see if I remember the order now. Okay. I think I show this slide in every single webinar that I do. And basically any talk I do, I end up referencing this if I'm not having visual aids. And it's something that I think is really important for everyone to look at because this is a very simple yet easily understandable breakdown of the job search process. And as I always say, when you are a job seeker, you suddenly become a salesperson, a marketer, because you are now selling the most important thing you will ever sell in your entire life, and that is you, your skills, your candidacy, your value. This is very much broken down like a sales funnel. Regardless of your job goal, whether you're trying to completely change careers, maybe you just want to switch an industry and move to a different industry and that feels like an overall career change, whatever it is, or maybe for those who are going on more of I'm doing the same thing and I'm moving along. I want a lateral move. I want to move up the chain, but doing the same type of work. This framework works for everyone, whether you are a seasoned professional or brand new to the workforce. And so I do recommend kind of taking a little personal snapshot of this and reminding yourself, because this is a nice way to break it down and make it kind of easier to digest. These are the areas that we'll touch upon, though I'm happy to answer questions about absolutely anything on this page that has to do with making a career change. That's what I'm here for. So keep that in mind when we're going into Q&A. Okay, so first I'm going to start off with some of my favorite exercises. And this will actually, I do recommend listening to this webinar again when you have the recording and pausing it along the way, because I'm basically going to explain how to do an exercise. And then in an ideal world, we would have enough time where I'd say, after I've introduced all of these, take out some worksheets and now do all of them. Obviously, we don't have that time. This isn't a full-on workshop. This is more of a webinar. And so I do recommend pausing it after each exercise or determining which ones you want to do and then taking a moment and actually going through those exercises because they can be really, really fruitful when it comes to figuring out that next step in your career. So the first is what I call Billboard Top Hits. And this was adapted from something that the 5 O'Clock Club did. I wish I could remember what they called it. They called it something completely different, but I adapted it a bit to work for my own purposes. And I found this very useful when I'm coaching clients. So first, I want you to brainstorm 10 of your proudest moments and really accomplishments. Some can be from your personal life or something outside of work, but you want a healthy mix of work ones as well. I remember that I worked with somebody and he was really proud that he took the time to like get some cosmetic work done or something like that. That's great, but that doesn't kind of help us for these purposes. So it is important. It can be from school if you've recently graduated, but think about what are 10 accomplishments that you're really proud of. And if you can't think of 10, that's okay, as many as you can get, because ultimately we want to narrow it down to 3 to 5 of what I call the most satisfying, the most rewarding, the things that you're still really proud of. And you're like, some of these don't belong on my resume, but I don't care. These are things that I'm very proud of. And it takes a little time. Walk through them. It could be something that you created, something that you finished that you never thought you'd be able to finish, a skill that you learned, whatever it is, brainstorm those out. And once you have that short list, once you've narrowed it down to say the top 3 to 5 that are most rewarding and that you're most proud of, then I want you to analyze them. Well, why? Why is it so important to you? Why is that one considered very rewarding and satisfying? How did you come to do this thing in the first place? Did you raise your hand? Were you tapped on the shoulder or encouraged to do it? What was your involvement? Were you the leader? Was it just you operating on your own? Were you a part of a team? Was it a cross-functional team? Was it within your department? What motivated you? Why were you excited to work on it? Or if you weren't excited in the beginning, why is it something that would end up on this list today? What was the focus of the work? What was the environment in which you were working? Was it remote? What was the culture like? What were the core values of that environment? What was expressed? And it could be, I'm talking really about a company. If you were doing a project within a company, sometimes those core values come into play. Maybe it was the nonprofit thing that they do on the side, the corporate social corporate responsibility, or whatever that initialism is. What skills did you leverage? And I'd actually take it a step further and/or learn. Did this help you learn something? Did this help you hone a skill you already possessed? Did this allow you to use skills that you were already really great at? So these are kind of all the little probing questions you want to use to analyze each of those top rewarding moments. And then once you've done that, take a step back and look for themes. Were all the things you liked ones that you raised your hand or convinced somebody to let you do? Was it something that you did on your own, or you got to build a team around, or you worked in a very collaborative environment? What was the industry? What was the focus of the work? What was the output? All of these things are going to help you kind of define what are things that are important to you. Because I talked about this being career goals as well as priorities. This is going to help you feel out some of those really important things as to when I'm looking for a career, what are some of those intangibles, or maybe they're very tangible, that are very important to me? Is it the ability for flexible work? Is it the company culture? Is it the comp? Is it the benefits? There are a lot of different things that go in there. Sometimes this type of exercise will help you get at some of that information. Does that make sense? I'm just popping into the chat to see if everyone's still on there. Oh, Grandel, I love that you love it. Thank you. All right, moving on. This is this is the follow-up where once you're analyzing, this is what you're trying to figure out. Through all those different experiences, what were the themes? Core values. What's the right type of work environment for you? What are the underlying skills, both soft and hard? And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between those in a bit, that were leveraged and that you like using, that you get excited to use. This is all going to help you kind of start crystallizing what those goals might look like. The nitty gritty. This applies most for those who already have a few jobs under their belt. If you are fresh out of school, look at internships, look at things you did, even volunteer stuff, that's fine. But this one typically applies to someone who's at least been in the workforce and had a couple jobs. So first, take a copy of your resume, or you can take a piece of paper or a Word doc or a Google Doc and create 3 columns for yourself. The first column would be the company name and the job title you held, and then you're going to have the good and the bad. Those are the other 2 columns. You can do this. I kind of prefer to do this on a resume. I'm old school. I print it out and I just write all over it. And then sometimes I then summarize it in a Google Doc after the fact, or a Word doc, so I can take a look at it again. But do whatever works for you. It's really the concept behind it is what's important to remember. For each role you held, and so if you held multiple roles at the same company, each one of those should get its own spot and own analysis. For each role, you want to jot down, what did you like about it? And get really specific. And it can be silly. It can be little details where you're like, really? But write it down, because you never know, there might be a pattern at the end. What did you like and what did you dislike about each role? Was it your manager? Was it, good or bad? And if it's obviously for the same company, there could be overarching dislikes or likes that hit multiple roles. That's fine. Be as specific as humanly possible. It's going to help you the most. Once you have this all done, again, it's take a step back and look for themes. And something I didn't mention before, but I actually like when I get to run a workshop, particularly when it's in person, I normally put people in about pods of 4, introduce all these activities, and then give them a good chunk of time to do all of these and share the information. And so you might want to, after you run through these activities, share it with somebody that you trust, a good friend or family member, because sometimes they'll see things that you overlook because you're too in the weeds. They might observe something that you don't see in yourself. And so I think that's important. And I would always do, it's great if you have a family member or someone that you really love, but I'd also do a friend, or, even better if you have like a former coworker or a current coworker who knows that you're looking for a career change. That tends to help. All right, 9 lives. I love this exercise. So this I learned years ago, and I always bring it up. I adapted it from another career coach who I saw speak at a resume writing conference years ago. Her name is Karen James Chopra of Chopra Careers. I always want to give her credit for this. And this was an exercise that she introduced all the attendees to. So here are the rules. You will have 9 lives. You must work in each of these lives. There's no trust fund. There's no lottery. You're not marrying rich. There's no inheritance. It's all you. You're going to have to work, point blank. Whatever skills, education, or experience you need in order to do the job, you have them. However much money you need to make to feel good about what you do, you're making it. Every position has equal prestige. So what do all these rules do? It means every time you've thought about a certain job and said, but I don't have the education, and I don't have the time to go back to school, or the money to go back to school, or the desire to go back to school at this time. Or, well, I love this, but it doesn't make enough money. I could never survive on this. These rules get rid of all of those buts. So the idea here is to write down 9 jobs, 9 lives. What would your 9 lives be? What roles would you hold in each of these? Knowing that you're always going to make enough money, your role is going to be considered as prestigious as you want it to be. It brings you everything you need. You can do it. What would those 9 lives be? And I initially actually had another slide in here that showed you my version of this. I did this exercise many years ago as well, probably at that conference. There's artist, art teacher. There was actually a career consultant on there, which I wasn't at the time. There was a spin instructor. A lot of mine had to do with art, presenting, writing, or helping people. There was a lot of teaching, coaching, that sort of thing. I think a swim instructor was on there, all those sorts of things. So it kind of works with what I do for a living. I'm helping people and coaching them through things. I do a lot of writing. I'm not necessarily painting and drawing as much, but I do have some fun working with the designers on images. But it gives you an idea of what you could do. Will these 9 lives be realistic? Could you really do any of these? Maybe not. Maybe they don't work. Maybe it's one of these lives is something that's been a childhood dream forever. And maybe you don't necessarily want to start over and suddenly become a doctor, or perhaps your time at being a ballerina, that window has opened and shut. It's not happening. But that's okay, because just like the other exercises that I already shared, the idea is always to take a step back and look for themes. What were those themes? Was it artistry? Was it being creative? Was it working with animals? Was it helping people? Was it something altruistic in nature? Was it super competitive? Was it being collaborative and working with others? Or was it kind of being your own boss? I actually think that's important to note, because if in the other exercise, in the nitty gritty, if one of the dislikes for every job was basically your boss, can you guys hear that thunder? It is cracking. I will mention that Jenna is also out on the island, and I know she's even farther out than I am and has been having internet issues. So I apologize if there's a little lag in us responding to you at the moment. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. But if in the last one, you hated every single manager you ever worked for, you may just have a very bad string of luck with managers, or it could be that you don't like working for someone, and perhaps it's time to find something where it's a little bit more independent, individual contributor, not so much of necessarily working under somebody. Food for thought. Okay, career SWOT. I don't know how many of you have taken business classes. I was a business major in college, and for our capping course, hello, Dr. Helen Rothberg. Love you for instilling this upon me. We always had to do SWOT analysis when it came to businesses. And so I'll explain what that is, but this time I want to do a career SWOT analysis. So your average SWOT is very simple, looks like this. You could make it just 4 columns. It doesn't have to be in a grid. This is just typically how it's been presented to me in the past. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And normally you're assessing a business or a business idea. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? These are things that are typically in your control, things that you can improve upon, overcome, or maximize, leverage. Opportunities and threats are typically external factors, things that you have to take into account, but you might not necessarily have control over. It's a really interesting exercise to do for just a business in general. And if you are one of those people who's considering going into business on your own, use this. This is definitely perfect for that. But for the purpose of this, assuming that most of you are looking for switching into a different career that is not necessarily breaking out completely on your own, this is how I'm interpreting it. How can you do a SWOT analysis about you and in a career path that interests you, or help you identify what that could be? So start with strengths. What are you great at? What skills have you built, honed, used over the course of your career? What have you taken courses on? What have people said that you're really great at? And I think it's important to put an asterisk next to all the strengths that you also enjoy doing. You can be great at something and absolutely hate doing it. And guess what? That probably shouldn't be the focus of your next career. So I think it's important to take a highlighter to the ones that you actually care about, or cross out the ones that you don't really want to leverage any more than you have to in a given job, because the strengths should also be things that you want to actually leverage or you want to find a way to use. Weaknesses, think about any constructive criticism you've received from your managers, from colleagues, from trusted friends. This is a good thing to keep in mind. What have you struggled with? What skills are on your list to improve, because it's something that has been holding you back in other parts of your life or in other chapters of your career. When it comes to opportunities and threats, again, it's a little different because we're talking about external factors, but things that I want to keep in mind, because honestly, depending on the answer, it could fall in opportunity or threats right now. If you're really interested in working remotely, if your location has been an issue in the past, now's an opportunity. More and more companies are doing hybrid work models, meaning that you only have to come into the office some days. Some people are going completely remote or allowing certain employees to go remote. One of my former mentors and the CEO of a company I used to work at, Mark Sanadella, he had this great quote, and I got to give him credit for it because I was like, oh, it's great. I should have said that. But he said, remote work is the new signing bonus. So that it's just a much more popular thing right now. There's an opportunity. If the job market around your current residence has always been kind of hit or miss, or it's been a challenge and the thought of relocating, you just don't want to do it, there are a lot more remote opportunities across industries, across different fields. So keep that in mind. What industries or careers are growing? This is more of just keeping an eye on the news. What's going on? Maybe setting up a few Google News alerts on certain terms or industries that are of interest to you just to see what's coming out. I also like to say, go on to a few different job boards and just type in different terms, looking at different careers and different job titles to see, are there a lot of them available? If so, how many are in my area? If so, how many are remote? So area doesn't matter. These are things to really keep in mind. And again, with threats, it's kind of the flip side. You may find out that in your industry, it's very rare that anybody ever works remote and everyone's going back whether you like it or not. It could be that that industry or profession still isn't faring well thanks to the pandemic, and maybe it's going to be in recovery zone for a while, so that's something to keep in mind. So always think about what happened during the pandemic and how does it look today? Is it coming back up, or is it slowing down, or is it still kind of stagnant? This will give you a sense, because honestly, there might be a career you really love, but if no one's hiring for it right now, that may be a much longer term goal that you can still take steps to become more qualified for, but you might not be able to pursue today. It really depends on your timeline. Are you currently employed and can you buy time? Can you go into what I call a stepping stone job, or do you need to move now? So food for thought there. When I talk about this in the SWOT analysis, the top half of this chart is really important because it's that self-awareness, it's that self-exploration. The bottom half, I think, is really important because it really comes down to also strategy, what's available today. You got to keep that in mind. So they really balance each other out. But when we're talking about strengths and weaknesses, a lot of that has to do with taking inventory of yourself, of your skills, of your experience. And so just if you're having trouble figuring out what all that would be, here are some places you can turn to help you fill out that SWOT analysis. And honestly, it could help you with some of the other exercises too. Take a look at old performance reviews. Take a look at any 360-degree reviews that were done. And that means that typically involve people above you at your same level, as well as anybody you may have managed, to get a real 360-degree look at who you are as a professional. I didn't put it on here, but if you've ever done any of those Myers-Briggs or personality tests, I think that stuff can be interesting. Some of those actually do talk about how if you're more introverted, these roles are better for you, or these career paths are better for you, versus if you're extroverted. There's a lot there. So definitely, if you've done those in the past, maybe look at them again. Consider any feedback or testimonials you've received from customers, vendors, clients. Again, all this language just depends on what you've done in your past. LinkedIn endorsements and referrals. Now, I will always say I'm kind of like, I don't put a lot of stock in them personally, because you can ask people to endorse you for certain things. You can decide what's prioritized there. But I do think it's interesting if you look at maybe somebody wrote a recommendation or a referral. If you didn't guide them to what you wanted them to write, what did they happen to pick up on, or what did they suggest that they talk about, or what did they end up putting in that final thing? That's really good feedback. Endorsements, when they're unsolicited, can be really interesting to see what do random people think of your skill set. And do take it with a grain of salt, because honestly, anyone's allowed to endorse somebody, whether they know. I mean, my mom tried to endorse me. I'm like, Mom, you've never worked with me. Like, I love you. Thank you so much. But it's not relevant because you haven't actually worked with me on those certain things. So again, take it with a grain of salt. Skills assessments and aptitude tests. There's a plethora of these out there. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you a few that are free that you can do. So these are great. If you ever took any of these as part of other employment things before, if you did them at work, pull that stuff back up. Your brag book. If you don't have one, put it on your list of things to do. You want to create a brag book. So what in the world is a brag book? It's a place where you honestly kind of store some of this information I'm listing above, where you chronicle when you have a great achievement, when you meet or beat a goal, when you get a promotion, when you receive more responsibility or a bigger budget. Anytime there's something that's potentially to brag about that demonstrates you're good at what you do, you got Employee of the Month, you were asked to mentor new hires, whatever it is, you were put on the social committee for the company. They clearly think you're good for the organization. All those things go into this brag book, which could be a physical, marble notebook. It could be a Word doc. It could be a Google Doc. It could be an app on your phone where you're taking notes. But the idea is it's really great to start adding to this and regularly updating it at least once a quarter, if not once a month, so that when it does come time to negotiate for more money or a promotion, or you're getting ready to change jobs and you need to update your resume and prepare for interviews, or you're doing some exercise like this, you have that information to call upon. It's really important. I'll put this out there, especially for any of you who are currently employed and looking to make that jump. If you suddenly lose your job, or if it wasn't your say, you may not have access to the most important information that will help you update your resume. So if you haven't already, make sure you're keeping a record of all the great things you're doing and quantifying those accomplishments wherever possible, or those contributions, so you have access to that later. All right. And then friends and family. I put this on here because it doesn't hurt to ask your friends, family, even current or former coworkers, what are some of my strengths? What do you see me working on doing? And I definitely emphasize friends and family in this for this type of webinar, because what you want to do next may not be something you're doing in your current job. And so it may not be obvious in your current job, but it might be a soft skill or even a hard skill that you use when you're around friends and family that they want to call attention to. So something to keep in mind. All right. These are the skill assessments and tests that I mentioned. These are all free. One is from the UK. The rest, there are a couple that it's obvious it came from the US, but I'm not sure about all of them. I will say ONET seems to be very US based, and actually Career One Stop leverages ONET quite a bit. ONET is actually powered or sponsored by the US Department of Labor. So that's their big thing. These are really cool. And some of these, I'm going to reference them again because they're so cool. Jenna, if you just want to let me know, if you want to message me, if you're able to share these links in the chat bot, or if you need me to. Just let me know if you need me to. I can hop on and do that real quick. Just wait. Okay, I think she's having difficulty, so I'm just going to pop them in for you so that you have access to them, just in case. Oh, did she just pop back in? She's in. Okay, great. I'm going to pop this out all. Here you go. Let's just see where this goes. Hopefully that should go to everybody. There you go. So those are all, oh, and Jenna already. Jenna, you're so good. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. So these are really helpful, and we're going to do this a few times. I have a few different slides with some resources, and we're going to try to really be good about sharing those links so you don't have to scribble them down or take screenshots. Something to keep in mind. So I just gave you a ton of exercises that ideally, and I'm going to pop back a few slides. Thing's going to freak out on me, I'm sure. So I gave you a lot of exercises to kind of help with goals, but I also all of them are going to help you try and inventory those strengths and weaknesses. But when it comes to opportunities and threats, again, I mentioned this is kind of where there's a little bit of strategy also involved in terms of, well, what's really available, what makes sense. You may have this great dream job, but there may be some huge gaps in your skill set that you're going to need to overcome to get there. So what I like to talk about is when you're being strategic about making a change, there are two types of things you want to talk about. You want to look for the bridge jobs, or the bridge gaps, as well as stepping stones. So what in the world are these? So when I talk about the bridge, let's say you have been in, say you've been in, finance. You've been in an accounting for a long time, but you really want to get into HR and you're not too sure how to exactly get there. Well, you might not be able to go straight to HR manager or even HR coordinator, or maybe you don't want to take that far of a step down, but you might want to look into roles in payroll, because it's kind of a merge of HR and finance. It involves both. And that might be the first step to getting you towards more of a strictly HR role while you gather some experience and maybe take a course or learn on the job and find the right environment for you. I have for instance, it actually involves that kind of example, but there was somebody that I recently spoke to, a friend of mine, and she's like, I've been in accounting for years. I hate it. I'm good at it, but I hate it. I can't do it anymore. I don't know what to do with myself. And she has this personality. She's such a connector, and I look at her, I'm like, gosh, you're sales. You're totally sales. You've got that people person vibe. Two options. Have you thought about becoming a salesperson and selling accounting software, or something that you would sell to accountants? Because you've got the soft skills and the personality that really go along with somebody who's in more of a salesy, face-to-face, client-facing type of role. And you'll be seen as an asset because you have an accounting background. So you're more likely able to talk the talk with potential clients, potential customers. So that was one option I talked to her about. And the other was, well, have you thought about becoming a recruiter? Recruiting is a people person job, but it's a real sales job as well. That's a big part of it. It's reading people and helping assess them, get a good read on them, but also then trying to sell them on certain opportunities. Have you thought about becoming a recruiter for a firm that focuses on accounting professionals or has that branch of business? And it's so funny because she said, you know what, I can't believe you said that, because I've always thought about kind of going into HR and I never knew what to do. And wouldn't you know, she did it. She's now a recruiter for an accounting firm. And she made that switch in the last few months. And I was so proud of her. But that's the bridge I'm talking about. How do you take what you already know and turn it into an asset instead of just this big skill gap? A lot of it, when you're thinking about this, think about, what type of customer have you worked with? What region of the country did you cover? Were you B2B or B2C? The industry is always really helpful. If your industry experience or what you did could be translated into an industry, that's something to keep in mind. At a company I used to work for, the Ladders, we would sell, job listings in our software package to recruiters, to recruiting outfits. So guess who we ended up hiring to be the sales professionals? Recruiters who didn't want to recruit anymore. Why? Because they understood it. They got it. They knew the person that they'd be selling to in and out. They understood what's good and bad about different types of software packages that would work for this group. So again, think about this. Another way, if you're really like, I don't know what bridges I have. One of my fun, and I don't have it in the deck, but it's a good tip. Go onto LinkedIn and run an advanced search for people who have worked in your field or for your former current employer or competitors of them. And then just go through that list. Just say like people who have previously worked at, of course I can't think of a name at the moment, but people who have previously worked at Microsoft. Okay. And if people who've previously had the word sales in their title, and it's always, you're trying to get like what they did before. Look at that. If you're in sales now and you're trying to get out of that, or you want to get out of more of like the Microsoft type of industry, start looking at where have these people moved to? These are people to reach out to. These are people just to give you some insight and some inspiration as to where has their experience been accepted in different fields. And perhaps that's something I should explore deeper to find out if that really works for me as well. So that one's incredibly useful. I feel like there was one more that I like to do. It's more of a for instance, because you're not going to know this without talking to people as to how in the world this fits. So once you find some people like that, you want to kind of get a sense of like, well, where are they going? What type of industries are accepting their experience? How have they moved from sales to marketing? That next role, what I call the stepping stone job between what they were doing before and what they ultimately ended up doing. What were their responsibilities? How much information is in their LinkedIn profile that I can look at? That helps you understand the type of role you might want to target. and or what skills you might need to build or which you should be emphasizing, highlighting, really putting a spotlight on because it's important. Okay, moving on. Stepping stone jobs. Why I mention this is because the goal that you might want, you might not be able to jump immediately to. There might be some stepping stone jobs in between that are going to help you build the experience or certain skills that will help you ultimately land the job that you truly want. You know, no one graduates from college and gets to be the CFO of a Fortune 500 company. Right? You need to build some experience in between. So I don't care who writes your resume. There's no way you're going to suddenly land that type of job. There are stepping stone jobs in between that are going to help you build up all the things you need in order to be qualified for that role. When you're making a change, and some of those I mentioned, you might need a stepping stone job in between. And we'll talk a little bit about how you figure that out. Okay. Transferable skills. This is the next section. I promised we were going to talk about transferable skills. So let's take a second to say, what in the world is a transferable skill? It's exactly what it sounds like. It means that it was helpful or useful or important in your current job, and it's something that can easily be transferred to a different function, a different field, a different industry, and it's still considered important. There are always some skills, those what we call the soft skills, that translate across every industry. There's tons of those: communication, leadership. There are lots of those kind of, high level, intangible skills that are always going to be important. And I think if I got this right, yeah, I bring this up. This is a survey we did at the second half of last year, where we asked employers what skills have become more important now than before the pandemic. When you look at these: adaptability, flexibility, you can read the list. These are all transferable to basically any job. No employer is going to be, oh, I don't want this in a candidate. It may not be the most important thing, but it's always going to be something that's useful. These are great, and we know that they care about them a lot now, so it's good to emphasize them. But when I'm talking about transferable skills, I want to get a little bit more specific about your technical skills and things that you do that are very specifically well suited for this other type of career, if that makes sense. Because there's lots of soft skills out there, but we want to get really specific. What are all those things you did, and how could some of that be applied to a very different industry? That's really important, because you got to prove that you have what they need, and or taking steps to fill any gaps that frankly are very important and you just don't have that certain skill or experience. Okay. I emphasize this a lot. I think it gets mentioned in every single presentation that I give, for better or for worse. And it was certainly a big topic at last month's webinar. I think it was last month, on networking. Informational interviews. I love me an informational interview. I think they're really important. What in the world is an informational interview? It is talking to somebody over a phone, over a screen, or face-to-face again, where you are talking to someone who works at a company that interests you, an industry that interests you, a certain career path, or a specific field or function. It's somebody who's doing something or working in a capacity or at a company that you're really interested in, and you are mining them for information. In other words, you are interviewing them, and you're not hoping to get a job out of it. You're hoping to pull more information to make educated decisions about your next move in your career. Something I did emphasize in the last webinar that I think is worth repeating. In an ideal world, you want to start with the people you already know well and care about you, because time is money. People are busy. It's been a very stressful 12 months, 18 months at this point, almost. And so not everybody is going to have the time or the mental capacity to give this type of advice to everybody. So start with your inner circle and start working your way out and making connections that way. You'll see better results that way. So how in the world do you find people who might be able to help you? First, I always say start with your social butterflies. Who are the people who seem to have friends in multiple circles? There's actually an exercise you can do if you're not sure who these people are in your life. Make a list of people that you know that you're friends with or connected with, or you have an actual relationship with, that somebody introduced you to. You didn't meet them at an event. Somebody at some point said, oh, you should talk to this, or let me introduce you to this person. Make a list of those people. 10 to 25. I think the original exercise is something like 25, 30, but do what you can. In the next column, who introduced you to that person? In the next column after that, well, who introduced you to that person? Do it out a few different levels to see who's the person who shows up most frequently. I used to think my friend Lauren was my power connector or my social butterfly, because I felt like I met so many people through her. But it turns out it was actually, her husband at the time. He was the one who knew everyone, but I met him through her. So her name popped up a lot, but he was the one who actually individually connected me to a lot of different people. You're trying to identify those people, because, especially if you have a good relationship with them, because once you have that, that's the person you can reach out to and say, I'm interested in learning more about this field, this industry, this type of career. I want to talk to people who are doing it so I can get a better understanding of if it's really a good fit for me. And not only that, what skills do I have today that work? Given what I do, what I know, what I'm great at, what type of role do they think I should try to pursue in this field, in this industry, whatever it might be? Is there any translation of my skills that need to happen? All those types of things. And is there any glaring, obvious skill gaps that I'm going to need to build in order to even break into it? Without going, too far back down the career ladder in the pursuit of this role. These are all things to keep in mind. Here are some subject lines you can leverage if you are introduced. In an ideal world, somebody is introducing you to a random person if they're going to be the one to help you, or that's the person you want to speak with, if it's not somebody you already know really well. If for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable introducing you, or they mention it and they said they mentioned it to the friend, but they didn't send any actual formal introduction, then I would leverage something like this, either in a LinkedIn in-mail or an email if you have their contact information. You'll notice that a lot of these have kind of brackets around them. Even the fellow Red Fox, that's a reference to my alma mater. I went to Marist College. These are all things because you're trying to find some point of commonality. Do you know the same person? You're from the same area. You follow the same team. You went to the same school, whatever it is. If you can find anything that makes it more of a warmer lead contact or a warmer lead as opposed to a cold one, it works in your favor. Informational interview questions to ask. I have 2 pages of these. Again, feel free to take a screenshot. You will receive a recording of this. You can pause it. We have an article on TopResume. Actually, we have an article on TopResume that goes into questions. This is my own personal list, but the article which was written by someone else covers similar information. So keep that in mind. These are all great questions to ask because, again, you're trying to tease information. You're giving them the opportunity to share their pearls of wisdom and kind of talk about their past a little bit because it can actually be really useful to you. So how'd they end up in this? Did they always want to do it? What do they like most and least? Where do most professionals start off? Like, what's the jumping off point in this industry? Is that consistent with what they've seen? Could it be different? What do they look for if they're somebody who hires people? This is really important. I really like the second one. I've been told that my core strengths as a professional are X, Y, and Z, or I enjoy working on projects that involve these types of skills. Again, wordsmith this as you see fit, but this is kind of the money question for me. If that's the case, what roles do you think I'd be best suited for in your field? That's what people do with me. They pick my brain. They're like, I hate accounting, and I already know her. I know she has great people skills, that the personality just exudes, that she could be really great at more of a people person interaction. That makes it easy. So what knowledge do you have? What skills do you bring to the table and you really enjoy using? And then you want to talk to people. And again, generalize them as much as you can. Don't use very industry specific language. Try and make it generic so they can understand and appreciate what you're bringing to the table. And they're more likely able to help you identify, what roles you'd be best suited for. Also, I kind of glazed over it, but in the last slide, a lot of what you're asking is also about what skills are most important for someone who's going to pursue this career, work in this industry, that sort of thing, because that's going to help you figure out, well, do I have that? Do I kind of have that? Do I need to work on that? That's going to help you identify those transferable skills. Also, if you're hearing it from someone who works in that industry, who's worked in that field, you'll also have a better understanding of how you might need to translate that experience into terms that a prospective employer would appreciate. And that's what comes down to your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your cover letter, even how you talk about your experience when you're networking or when you're interviewing. The one thing I always throw out here is to be very careful of is don't ask, can you get me a job? It's kind of implied that if they could help you get a job, it's something you want. That, you don't have to point blank say it. And frankly, when you put them on the spot, 9 times out of 10, they can't. And you're trying to avoid asking them questions where they say no. Just like when a salesperson calls you on the phone, they always try and ask you a question that you will respond to in an affirmative, positive way, because that sets the tone for the conversation. If the first thing they ask you, your answer is no or a negative response, chances are the rest of the conversation doesn't go as well. Same principles apply when you're doing informational interviews. The other questions here also help you figure out, well, what blog should you be reading? What association should you be following or participating in? This will all help you, A, figure out if you really want to work in that, and B, get a better sense of how to translate your experience into terms that prospective employers will appreciate in this new target field. Okay. Here are, if you're still like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. This is another way that you can also look at figuring out how to translate your skills, figuring out what careers might make sense given the skills that you already have. So these are 3 different skill translators that are out there. Career One Stop, as I mentioned before, is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Labor. And then within this site, there is lots and lots of subcategories. It's a cool site to explore. Skillsmatcher is also something that they link to on there. Obviously, it has the same URL. Again, it's going to help you put in your skills. It's then going to show you what career options could be a good fit. ONET data is also useful. It's also useful when you're trying to translate experience and change it up on your resume or your cover letter or your LinkedIn profile. And then because I don't want, and I have no idea if there's anybody on here, but I want to make sure I cover all my bases. This is specific for anybody who's a veteran and particularly a US veteran. So I apologize for my international viewers. I don't know those as well, but in the US, these are all very helpful in specifically being able to say, I did this in the military. What does that translate to? How could I leverage that in a civilian career? So these are all really great sites to check out. And I have Jenna has these links, so she can share both of these slides worth of links. So when it comes to the resume, we've talked a lot about exploration, and I know most of you are like, well, I still haven't figured it out. Of course not. You haven't had time to do any of the exercises or have those conversations or meet those people. Something I didn't mention, I just want to keep reminding, we have over 200 people on this webinar right now. This is a great chance to find somebody who you could potentially conduct an informational interview with. Just because they're leaving that field doesn't mean it might not be the field you're looking for. So that's why I really wanted to make sure everyone said, well, this is what I have experience in and this is what I want to do. Because everyone should be looking at what people have experience in, because they should reach out to them and figure out. Just because it's not their jam now doesn't mean it might not be your jam. So 100% try and find those connections. Again, you're not as cold contacts as you would be just randomly found someone on LinkedIn and reached out to them, because you're all here for a similar purpose. And so I would hope you'd want to help as much as you need help and get help. So going back, that's my little getting off my soapbox. When I'm talking about applying for a job, so say you found the job. I guess I could take it a step back and say, networking can be very, very useful when you're trying to switch careers. Why? Because you might not have to directly apply to a job online. You might get to have a conversation with the decision maker and morph your job. I didn't throw it out there, but depending on what you do, if you're trying to change focus, maybe sales to marketing or HR to finance, if you're at a company that you actually enjoy, figure out if there's a way to make that move within your existing company. If you don't hate that company, but you just want to be doing something different, I do recommend exploring your options. And can you take on some more responsibilities that help the other field, that make your resume look better and make it easier to make the transition? Or perhaps you can make that transition within the company. Depending on the size and the flexibility of the company, you might be able to make that change within. Definitely food for thought. When you're trying to change industry and function, a lot of things at once, the more things you're trying to change, the more challenging the job search becomes. So if perhaps you can make that functional change from sales to marketing, accounting to tech, whatever it is, if you can start making inroads or actually make that switch within your existing company and then leverage that to then seek out a different company, a different employer in a different industry, again, stepping stones, think of it that way. That's sometimes a much easier search. So just food for thought. I'm not saying you have to do it one way or another, but something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to you found a job, you want to apply for it, you're super excited. If you know the employer's name, always look to see if you know anybody who works for that company. Always, no matter what department they're in, they might be able to introduce you to someone else. Always check, because you're 10 times more likely to land the job when your application is accompanied by a referral. Whenever you can name drop, or whenever somebody can pass you along to a decision maker so you can kind of cut the line and the application process, even though you probably still have to formally apply, it's always to your benefit. So keep that in mind. But when you're applying for jobs, the same rules apply, just as you would if you were going for a role that's in your given career path. You always want to focus on the job requirements, your qualifications, and results that prove that you're good at what you do. The other two things that I threw on here that I want to make sure you also keep in mind is that there is a lot of repositioning, rebranding when you're setting your resume up for a different field. There also could be generalizing generalizing, we're going to go with that term, of the information. So let me talk a little bit about that. Once you have a good sense of the field you want to go into, or the career path you want to switch to, you're reading up, you want to follow accounts of companies and professional associations that are in that area. You want to set up Google News alerts for employers that interest you, for industry terms that make sense, so you can stay up on like what's going on in that industry, because that's all going to help you make small tweaks to your resume that will make a big difference. It will also help you in the interview process. But you want to keep in mind, now that you have a better sense of which of your skills are most important, maybe you're working on filling some of those skill gaps. I haven't really talked about that, but there are a few ways to do that. You can do skill-based volunteer work. You can offer your services up pro bono, so you can kind of learn as you go along. You can do side projects. You can also take courses. Coursera, edX, lynda.com, which LinkedIn bought. Those are a few off the top of my head. If anybody has any great resources, please, I am not the end all be all of every resource out there. For anything that I've mentioned today, if you know a really good one that you've tried, or you know someone who tried and really liked it, please share it in the chat. Please share those resources. Let's help everybody out. But you want to, now that you have a better sense, now you have to take a second look at your resume with a new goal in mind. And I always say this, when you may have a foundational resume, but when you're going to start a job search, you need to remember, what is that career goal, and reevaluate your resume with that goal in mind. For each role that you held, are there details you didn't include before that are now suddenly more important? Can you translate some of your skills and experience into different terms that are more readily recognizable and appreciated in whatever target industry or field you're going into? Do you need to make them more generic? So here's a good example. My cousin used to work at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and she was in sales and she was great at it, but all she wanted to do was get into more of like an e-commerce. She wanted to work at Birchbox at one point. She wanted to do something that was more fashion-y, or, you know, an industry that really excited her. She had a really great core skill set, but she didn't have any industry experience, and she was really having trouble figuring out how to explain that on her resume during the interview process. And what it came down to is we took the word cars every time she was talking about cars, and we would say, talk more about how she exceeded her quota. Instead of cars, we would say product, or automobiles, we'd say product or units. So again, we were just removing stuff that made it obvious that she wasn't in that industry and hadn't worked in that industry, and focused more on how can we demonstrate she's really good at selling. So guess what? She can learn how to sell this kind of stuff too. She's really good at working with this type of customer. She can make that work for you. That's something, again, when I'm talking about the bridge roles. Also, when you're looking at your resume and your LinkedIn profile and things like that, think about even how you just, if you have a one-liner that describes the company, think about what information you want to highlight there because it's relevant for what you're looking for. Maybe it's the size of the company. You worked for really big companies, you want to work for a really big company again, or you worked in startups and you want to continue working in startups. You're used to being scrappy and wearing multiple hats. Perhaps it has to do with the type of customer that you cater to. Whatever that is, make sure that's emphasized because you don't want to leave it up to chance. You want to idiot-proof your resume so anyone can glance at it and see the parallels between what you were doing and what you're looking to do now. I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to pop in the chat. Just give me a little, does that make sense? Does that make, yes, Eventbrite is great for events. Also, oh, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot to mention this one. I talk about it a lot. 10times.com, conferences all around the world, webinars all around the world. It's one of my favorites. Okay. Thanks, Liz. Okay, this was taking a look at this. I'm sure you can't read it. You'd have to like put your face really close to it. But, I pulled from this job description. What are all the things that kind of got mentioned as things they care about? What are things they're looking for? How many of these can I say I did in some way, shape, or form? So that's a way you want to kind of extract what they care about. What are both the requirements and how many of those work with your qualifications. Also, I'm looking for terminology because as with any resume, you want to make sure that it's ATS friendly. I've done a workshop on that. I'm happy to, if you go to topresume.com or topcv.com and you search in career advice for ATS, capital A, capital T, capital S, you will come across the articles we have that talk about how to make your resume or CV ATS friendly. A big chunk of that is optimizing it with specific keywords based on what you're seeing in the job descriptions. So this type of exercise works for both repositioning your resume or CV for a particular role, as well as making sure that if you're applying to that particular role or position, your resume is ATS friendly. Okay, I have two examples here of resumes that, this one I didn't write, this was written by one of my colleagues. The second one that I'm gonna show you is one that I wrote for Business Insider a while back, but they both indicate a job change or career change. What's very interesting and something to know is that your resume or CV might get shorter when you're going for a career change because not all the information may be as relevant. You're not going to sit there and list everything you've done or possibly could do. You want to focus on what are the most important pieces of information that actually are transferable. You're never going to like remove a bunch of jobs so that it looks like you have these weird gaps in your history, but you're going to limit how much information you provide about a role if it's not as relevant to what you're doing today. And so this is an article. It's on the Top Resume site. I believe we have something similar on the Top CV site as well. If you look for career change resume, career change CV, you will find this this example. I think it's like 7 changes to make if you're changing jobs. And so what's interesting is I always say, don't have an objective. Don't do an objective on your resume because normally an objective is like this short little paragraph that explains, very vaguely with very little with very little detail, what you're looking for in a job. And that's always been Employers don't want to read that. Recruiters don't want to read that. They want to read, a professional summary, something that summarizes your qualifications, that indicates why you're qualified for the type of role that you're now pursuing. But what's interesting is with this specific example, at the top, we write objective and the type of title that this person is looking, that Stanley is looking to do. And that's not his real name, FYI, we always change that. We put objective because Stanley's never been an in-house lobbyist. And Stanley felt really weird about putting in-house lobbyist as the title on his resume since he's never done it before. It's something he wants to do. He's a lawyer. He has a legal background. And so this is a nice way that you can say, hey, this is my objective. And then there's a little line under there that explains how, what type of experience you have with emphasis in what areas and why this is not such a leap to make. And then the paragraph below, known as the professional summary, again, is really summarizing and highlighting whatever qualifications he has about his experience, his skills, hard and soft, that he's honed as a lawyer that will make him a very good in-house lobbyist. I know this is a little small to read. I apologize, but you can review the example on the TopResume website. There is also a version on TopCV, if I remember correctly. But either or, it's going to give you the same kind of information. And then it kind of gives you a sense of just what are some of the things that we did here. You're always going to lead with your best selling points. And then I want to show you one more example. Okay, so this was something, and I actually kind of mentioned this type of example in the past where it was somebody who, this is actually, somebody who came from a recruiting background who now wants to become a sales professional. And so what's a very nice bridge? Well, it's a sales professional that is selling things like applicant tracking systems or SaaS or SaaS, whatever you want to call it, social recruiting platforms, things of that nature. Why? Because that leverages her industry experience, So I didn't put objective at the top, but you could have. Instead, I put a very high level sales professional and then kind of put a subtitle that explains like what areas, what industries, what makes sense, what types of things could she sell? And then put a one-liner below that before I went into my my professional summary. Again, this all kind of sets the stage. And then other things that I mentioned here is there are certain things that got added into this resume that she probably didn't have in her original one. So for instance, she's part of Toastmasters. That's all about public speaking. That's all about presenting. Well, though, if you're part of something like that, you're honing skills that are actually relevant to the career you want to take on. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, this one you can actually find, if you go to jobsearchamanda.com and you click on contact, I actually hyperlink to this as an example of a career changer resume. I will throw that in there for you in the chat real quick so you have that to look at. So, Amanda, is the cover, okay, so Holly, I just happened to see your question, so I will 100% answer this one right now. Jenna, you don't need to copy this one down. Is the cover letter still relevant and necessary? Interesting question, Holly. Actually, back in September, we polled recruiters. We surveyed them and said, hey, are you more likely or less likely to read a cover letter now than before the pandemic? And the majority said they are more likely to read the cover letter now than before the pandemic. Now, let's put it in context. Pre-pandemic, it was about a 50-50 shot. Some people still considered it very vital. Other people fully admitted they skipped over it. Now we're hearing that, at least, this is obviously a few months old now, but we hear recruiters saying, well, actually, I'm more likely to read it now. And frankly, that was the opposite of my hypothesis. I was convinced that you would not need that. I was wrong. Frankly, I was wrong. Sorry, I'm pulling up the thing for you all at the moment. So bear with me 1 second because I know that Jenna's not going to know where this one was because I pulled it out and failed to share it with her. So here's the Career Changer Business Insider article. And yeah, it's an older article, but the example is still very relevant. Okay, so the moral of the story is yes, actually, cover letters are important. You never, and honestly, my answer, even regardless without that pandemic information, is that it was always a 50-50 shot whether you were going to send your application to someone who really cares about them or doesn't. You don't know who you're sending it to. You don't know who that person is. So unless it states, do not send me a cover letter, I would always send a cover letter. Why? It's one more opportunity to brand yourself. It's a place where you can put information that could advance your candidacy that frankly doesn't belong on your resume. For a career changer, I think it's incredibly important because you want to leverage that cover letter to explain why you're interested in moving into this role. What have you learned in your previous experience? What skills have you built? What have you learned about yourself that has moved you to this direction? Because they need that extra context, and it's challenging sometimes to put that into a resume. A cover letter is yet another opportunity. A LinkedIn profile is yet another opportunity. Okay, I'm going back to slides because we have about 11 minutes. We have some time left for Q&A. So yes, I want to go to questions. Jenna, if you want to throw those questions up for me in our channel, I will start pulling them, and I am going to rattle off as many as I can. I'm just going to put it on this slide for now so that there's something there. But I'm going in. Ooh, I see them. Holy moly. Okay, let's get going. What are your recommendations for someone who already knows what industry or niche they want to pivot into, but are having trouble translating their skills in a way that's easy to understand? Okay, I'm not too sure who asked this one, but hopefully I did kind of answer this. I think actually informational interviews can be really helpful. So even if you're taking a copy of your resume because you've already tried to translate it, I would talk to somebody who works in that niche, in that industry, and actually speak to them about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Resume writers can also help. Just putting that out there. If you're very clear on, I'm having trouble translating this, they may be able to help you. Some of those resources that I shared with you actually explain or like give you translations of your skills, and that can be really useful. The ONET website in general, and the user experience, not fantastic, but the information it provides, super, super valuable. So I'd give that a try. Eric asked, how important is it for a company that a candidate has a strong background in the field that they're entering? There's a real flexibility from the companies to accept people that have theoretical experience, courses, books, certificates, but their background is in a different field or even professional career. So, you know, how hard is it to change to a different industry? Basically, if you have no experience in that industry, I'm not going to say it's a walk in the park. I mean, I'm never going to lie to you, and I don't want to sugarcoat things either. It's going to depend on how crazily different it is. And so that's why if you're not sure exactly what you want to go into, I'd be very strategic about figuring out what maybe a bridge industry is, something that makes sense because it leverages part of your old knowledge, your old experience in a different way so that your differences from your average candidate who's always been in that career path or in that industry, you know, you're seen as individual and actually a benefit. It's something different. So something that's really interesting, when I worked for a job board in our marketing department, the majority of the people we hired to do our emails and our marketing and stuff like that came from dating sites. Think about it for a second. Both a job board as well as a dating site is trying to match two entities. Various different ways, of course, but they actually are very similar. I don't know if you would know that offhand, but that's an easier industry to jump into. I think you can find information out online where it's what other industries are similar, have that kind of experience. This is when I like to do the advanced searches on LinkedIn and see what industries have other people in my profession who come from my background moved into, because it gives you inspiration. But you're never going to get anything better than talking to a few people who work in the industry you're really interested in, or even who have made a change, who can give you some of those ideas. This is also a good time to work with a career coach. If you're really kind of banging your head against the wall because you're not too sure if the change you're making is very extreme, they might be able to help you figure out maybe that stepping stone job in between to help you get there. I hope that helps. So how important is it? It's going to depend on what industry you're coming from and what industry you're targeting. I know that's a very unsatisfactory or, not a very satisfying answer, but it really is going to depend on like how wild of a swing is it. And so in an ideal world, you're trying to make that swing not as drastic so that it's an easier transition. The more drastic of a change you're making, the more you need to reevaluate your skill set and try and fill in those gaps, and B, leverage your network to help you get past some of those preconceived notions or those uncertainties or objections about hiring someone outside the industry. Diana, how does one put those skills on our resume without sounding cliche? Oh, that's a really great question. Yeah. So some of these, especially the softer skills, flexibility, adaptability, communication, I know they're the fluffy words. Here's the deal. There's probably two places that you want to put them in your resume, incorporate them into your resume. At the very top of your resume, and let me go back a few slides so I can give you an example. So this one's kind of hard to read, but you see where the number 3 is on this example? Just above that, it says a foundation in recruitment with these core competencies. And then below that is a list of core competencies. That is a place where you can just legit insert terms that describe your skills, your qualifications, your strengths. We can look at the other one too, just so you get a better idea. His are a little easier to read. So it says, key lobbying skills include, and these are all of those types of skills filled out. So that's where you first state them. And this applies for anybody who's looking for a job. You want to state a skill so you're getting the keyword in there. If it's a word that's showing up in the job descriptions in particular, you want to leverage that and put that in there. But then you have to prove it. So you can say you're great at anything, but if you don't back it up with some evidence, it's meaningless. And so yes, it may feel a little cliche to incorporate those terms in that professional summary and in this core competency or areas of expertise section, but that's just to kind of briefly mention it and get it up there and get it in that top third of your resume or CV. Then you have to find opportunities in your professional experience, in your education, in your professional development, in your volunteer experience, wherever it might be, where you can provide an example that demonstrates why you're good at that. So it is cliche if you only throw it in the top. You have to back it up with facts. That's kind of the moral of that story. Randall asks, how do you overcome the Autobots that review your resume? So the Autobots are also known as the applicant tracking system, the applicant tracking software, the hiring robots, the bots, or as many people have told me, kind of like the devil. That is a very long conversation that I can't summarize quickly. Well, I can give you a few things. One, unless it says it accepts PDF documents, you should always submit your resume or CV as a Word document. It's one of the most parsable that still allows you some design freedom. Avoid custom fonts, avoid custom bullet points, any type of images embedded in your resume. Chances are none of that will be able to be read when it goes through an applicant tracking system. Always make sure you are optimizing your resume with keywords that you're finding in the job descriptions you're applying for. That's incredibly important. And then Jenna, if you're cool and your technology is still all working, if you could just make sure, if we haven't already, take the top 2 articles on TopResume that talk about beating the ATS system and making sure your resume is ATS friendly. They apply for CVs and resumes, so you can look at those will work for anyone. So you can look at those. If you go to either topresume.com or topcv.com and click on career advice, there will be a search field for you where you can search terms. Just put in ATS and it will pull up the articles that I'm mentioning that literally list point for point what to do. I've also done an office hours, and yeah, I've done at least an office hours, if not a webinar, on applicant tracking systems in the past. And so you can see a video where I go into like really deep detail about those things as well. Sanja asks, can you talk a bit more about how to ask hiring managers for the informational interviews? Oh, this is a very important point. You're not asking hiring managers for an informational interview. You are not going to someone that you found online and you're hoping they have a job for you and saying, I would love to interview you. You're actually finding people within your network. So friends of friends. I mean, they might be hiring, but that's not the point. It's people in general, where you're pulling up and you're asking them, you're asking for a meeting to talk to them. So I can actually, let me see if I have it. Where is it? I just pulled up, I had an example of one recently. Here we go. So let me pull this up really quick and I will paste this into the chat box for anyone who's interested in it. Just bear with me for a second while I find it because I had it up earlier. Here we go. I think we're almost there. Here we go. Okay. So, you know what? I wonder if can I take images? I don't know. Let's see if this works. Bear with me, folks. Here we go. Yes, everyone's receiving a copy of the webinar for anybody who just asked. So here is at this point in my career, this is a sample of a message that you might say to somebody. Obviously, change it so it makes sense for you. But this is an example of some language that you could use or modify when asking somebody for an information interview. I hope that helps. Okay, let me go back to those questions. Okay, Holly asks, any advice on a workaround for positions that you apply to on LinkedIn or Indeed that don't provide contact information? Is there a best way to follow up on your? Oh, great. Okay, so application follow-up. Yes, whenever you can, you want to. If they're being super shady and really don't want anyone to know, there's probably a reason for it. And so tread lightly, particularly for senior level positions. They kind of get suspicious if they're like, how'd you find me? A couple things you can do. Highlight a section of the job description, like that describes what you'd be doing or something, and Google that in quotations to see if the job listing shows up anywhere else. You might be able to find the recruiter or the hiring manager who did it. If you know the company, but you don't know the individual, that's when you have to get a little crafty and do some detective work on things like LinkedIn or talk to people in your network who might be familiar with that company to identify who potentially is the right person to talk to. Those are two ways to go about it. More and more, you're seeing people actually post their own jobs. If it's finding an individual within a particular company and you know the company, then that's more of trying to figure out the org chart. So look at their website and look at LinkedIn to see if they're on there. Chances are, if it's a professional role, they're on LinkedIn these days. Allison asks, I'm an older worker switching careers and don't look my age. I just want to approach it sensibly. Any suggestions? That's a great question. So with any resume, you only want to highlight the most recent 10 to 15 years. You don't necessarily have to go into any details beyond that. And frankly, it's important to not, because you're trying to keep your resume or CV to about 2 pages. There are some exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, 2 pages is what you're aiming for. Anything after that, you can put a career note or, a little section of earlier experience that explains kind of your career progression. When you're changing careers, it actually works to your advantage because you can emphasize how many years you have of experience that's super relevant. You don't necessarily have to put a number out there that shows like your total time in the workforce. And then when it comes to a career change, it's really going to depend on, you can make a career change later in life. That is, there are plenty of articles that talking about making a career change in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. I think it really comes down to what you're willing to compromise on and sacrifice to get there. If it's requiring you to get more education or get a certification, are you willing to do that? If you would have to take a pay cut and kind of go a step back or 2 in your career in order to get on the right trajectory, are you in a financial position where you can make that happen? And these are questions for anyone. When you're making a change, it's rare that you can go from VP level of this to suddenly VP level of that if you're completely changing career paths. And are you okay with that? So for you, you got to kind of figure out what are you okay and not okay with. There's a really cool book out there. Oh gosh, now I got to try and remember. It's written by a woman named Dawn Graham. Bear with me one second. I will Google it real quick and pull it up for you. I love her book. She actually has kind of an exercise in there to help you figure out if you're really as willing to make the really willing to make that career change. So if you Google, I'm going to actually give you two things. I'm going to give you the Google results because there's a lot here. Oh yeah, if you're, oh sorry, I didn't see the part about the, so it's a really long URL, but you click that, that will take you to Dawn's stuff. And she's got, I mean, she has YouTube videos. She has like a functional switch, levels of switching. There are lots of different stuff there. She has a book called Switchers, which I think is really great. I saw her speak at a resume writing event in 2019, and I thought she was phenomenal. So I highly recommend taking a look at her stuff. We're a couple minutes over, so I'm going to try and read a few more of these and see where I can get. It is definitely possible to, I know it's harder to make a change later in life, but for anybody who's looking for a job later in life and they feel like they're coming up against a lot of hurdles, one thing to keep in mind is you may have more flexibility to your schedule. There may be things that you can do and offer that, say, somebody with like 2 small children can't do. Keep that in mind. Never make fun or draw attention to your age. Instead, focus on your experience. And in a career-changing situation, it's all about your most relevant experience and translating that. Also, leverage your network. Leverage your network. I can't emphasize that enough. I know people are like, oh, well, that's kind of vague, but really networking can be an incredibly great component when you're trying to make a switch, or if you're coming across a lot of hurdles due to age discrimination. Also, go to websites where you know that they're looking for people or they expect people to have more, to be older. AARP actually has a really great job site. I mean, disclaimer, TopResume is partnered with them. So just letting you know about that. We do their resume critiques and stuff like that. But they have a really great career resource center. If they're listing jobs, it's because those employers want that age group to apply for these roles. So something to keep in mind. How personal should a cover letter be? That is from Gregory. That's a great question. There is a line. So what I like about the cover letter and even kind of the summary section of LinkedIn is you can show a little bit more of your personality than you can in a resume. A resume is still kind of a cut and dried document. So you do want to find little ways to show your personality. I often like to start cover letters, and this is for somebody who feels very confident writing, and it's not something that an average resume writer is going to write for you because it's so personal and so specific to roles. So it's more of something that you'd workshop. But opening your cover letter with actually a little story that explains like a circumstance or a challenge that you dealt with and how you overcame it, something work-wise, something that shows that basically illustrates the skills that are most important for the role that you're looking for. People are much more willing to read a story that then goes into a regular cover letter than, you're very, I am interested in this role, blah, blah, blah. So something to keep in mind there. When it comes to personal, I just don't do too much information in the sense that you don't want to disclose anything about age, about health issues, about family issues. Keep it all focused on why you're super excited about this role, why you're making this switch. If there is a little personal story there, yes, but just censor it. And when in doubt, ask somebody else to read over it and see if it's too personal. Will you do a cover letter webinar? I've honestly never thought about that, Randall, but I will definitely put it on the list. I think the next one that people have really asked for is around ageism and age discrimination, overcoming that. And truth, I also want to get somebody else to help me with that one. I mean, it's something I give advice on, but I like to have somebody who's also gone through that experience. And so I want to see if I can partner with somebody to help with that. I actually do a lot of webinars with AARP, and we often cover it's no matter what job search thing we're doing with them, it always ends up also being about combating ageism, combating age discrimination, because it's just the nature of that audience, Do you need a different resume CV for every specific position, or can a general one be distributed? That's from Margarita. Such a great question. What I like to say is you have a foundational resume. It's very important to have kind of a clear direction as to the type of role you're going after, the type of position. If you have lots of different goals, then frankly, yeah, you'd have to have very different resumes, and you can only have one LinkedIn profile. So then what do you do? right? So I like to have one clear goal, or at least, track in mind. And then I find 3 to 5 examples of job listings that illustrate the type of role that I want to pursue. And I use them as fodder for building what I call this base or foundational resume. And then once I have that, before I submit the resume for a specific position, I then make slight tweaks to the content to optimize it for that system and for who's ever going to read it. So I might reorder some of the information I put in there. I might swap out a term because it's presented differently in that job description. I might have some extra bullet points of like different contributions or accomplishments that are not necessarily always relevant. It depends on the role. So I might pop one of those in. But that's kind of what I mean by customizing or tailoring your resume for each application. It should not be a complete transformation change of the resume every single time. It's slight little changes to a base document that you already set up based on your goals. Is it okay to downgrade the resume with respect to degrees if they're not relevant? I don't want to be overqualified and recent experience is important. Yeah, if you have multiple degrees and some of them are 100% not relevant for what you're doing, yeah, you can remove them. That's perfectly fine. That's not considered lying. One thing to keep in mind is a resume or CV. Think of it as a marketing document, something you're carefully curating, not a transcript of everything you've done, both in your professional life as well as your education. And so you can pick and choose what you share. Just be careful that you're not creating big gaps in your work experience. That's the only thing that I get nervous about, but that shouldn't be an issue when it comes to the education stuff, hopefully. What's the best way to fill gaps if you are out of work from the pandemic? Well, one great thing to tell you, Paula, is that survey I mentioned that we did with recruiters, they actually said that big employment gaps carry less of a stigma now than before the pandemic. So keep in mind, people are less concerned about that. That said, if you want to try and fill that gap, it's some of those things I mentioned earlier. Skills-based volunteer opportunities. You can go on to Catch a Fire. You can go to idealist.org for some. That's a lot of nonprofit work, but sometimes you'll find them on there. I think there's something called Pathfinder, but I could be making that up, or maybe I just watched the movie The Martian too recently. If you Google the term skills-based volunteer opportunities, or SBV opportunities, you will pull up websites that offer that. That's a great way to leverage your skills and offer them up to fill the gap. You can take online courses. It's not necessarily going to help you with a gap that occurred a long time ago, but if you're in a current gap, if you're currently unemployed, this is a way to show some experience. You can also do pro bono work. You don't have to be paid for something in order to put it on your resume. You just want to show how you are doing things that are keeping your skills sharp and continuing to make you an attractive candidate. Can you elaborate on the age factor? Oh, Allison, I'm sorry. I don't think we have time to go any deeper on that. But I think that's going to be the next webinar, and we'll probably do that around September. So like, keep your eyes peeled for that. We're going to take off the month of August. Adrian asks, how do you include volunteer information in your resume? 2 different ways you can do that. You can either have a section for volunteer experience after your career experience, if it's just something you've been doing and you want to highlight it because it's relevant to what you're doing today, or you want to show that you volunteer because frankly, that's considered a positive by most employers. If you've been out of work and you're trying to leverage volunteer experience to fill a gap, then I would put it in your career or your work history, and then just make sure that when you put the title, or if it's volunteer, you give it a description of what you did. Somewhere in there, you stipulate that it was a volunteer role, because you want to be honest, but you also, if you were doing things or leveraging skill sets that are relevant to what you want to do today, if working that volunteer role actually got you some industry experience into the industry you want to move into, oh my goodness, 100% put it in there and put it in work history as opposed to a separate section. And then I already answered Holly's question about, are they still relevant? That was the big bunch I had. I know I kept 12 minutes over this time. I did make this event longer. Allison, there is a lot on the website, but yeah, look out for the next webinar. I'm pretty sure that's the next one I'm going to do. If not, it will be sometime this fall for sure. I want to thank you all so much for hanging with me, for asking all of your thoughtful questions. I hope this was useful. As I mentioned, you will definitely get a copy of the presentation. There will be an email sent out tomorrow that will include a link that will take you to our website where you can access this recording. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to TopResume if you want them to, or TopCV if you want them to review your documents, and Top Interview if you'd like interview coaching help. That's really popular, especially when you're changing careers. But otherwise, I want to wish you all the best of luck on your job search, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care, everybody, and thank you so much. Again, I'm Amanda Augustine, and I'm the resident career expert for Talent Inc.'s suite of brands, TopResume, TopCV, and Top Interview. Have a great day. Oh, and here I am.